Okay, if you can hear me, let's see. There we go. Still not in my game. Still not feeling 100%. So we're trying to get us back to normal. Here we go. Now, as I was saying, on the fact that you didn't hear me, we were talking about that every year 8th grade students have to go through a Holocaust unit. You guys would have read a book in your language arts classes. We would have did a couple days of PowerPoints and lectures and stuff like that and met the requirement. So today we are going to be doing this again, making sure that everybody can hear me. Can you guys hear me? Oh, it says my microphone's going. Just making sure. So, so we're going to be doing that today together as a group. Sorry, I'm sweating. And hopefully we get through this pretty quickly. This whole unit works a lot better when I can talk to you guys back and forth. So hopefully we get through this. We can do a Schoology discussion later if you guys, or conference, whatever you want to call it. We can do that later if you guys would like. But for right now, I'm going to go through the PowerPoint with you. You guys can watch me talk about it live. Go back and watch it, whatever you feel is needed. So we're going to get through this and hopefully have some fun with it. I mean, to the extent that we can have fun with this, right? We're talking about the death of 6 million people, and it had nothing to do with things that they have done in their past or their particular personality types. It had to do with who they were, what heritage they had, and where they came from. And we need to talk about more than just, the Holocaust. Yes, many people know that many millions of Jews died during the Holocaust, but it was more than just the Jewish people in Europe. It was a large number of different ethnic groups that were killed during the Holocaust. And the biggest question a lot of kids have is well, how did the people living in Germany at the time let it happen? And that's the big thing. It's like, even if it was kept secret, that's one thing, but how do everyday people allow this to happen? And how can it happen? And actually, it really wasn't as hard as you might think. It really was fairly easy to make this work, but it had to have certain situations put in place, right? Certain conditions had to be present to get there. And so that's what we're going to talk about first, is how we got there. Because when we think of dictators and people who take office by force, we think of people who would use violent means to become a leader. And when you use violent means to become a leader, then you control people through fear and violence. But in this case, Adolf Hitler, through propaganda and through by grabbing onto a country's fear coming out of World War One, and latching on to it and exacerbating that fear would ultimately lead us to where we are, or they went to in World War II. And so we're going to do the PowerPoint together. Let me make sure it's up and ready, because that would be a factor. Let's see. PowerPoint. Oh, no. Hold on. This is tricky. Let me just go ahead and... You guys can't see what's happening on my screen, but I can. Let's see. You know what? We can always just do this. Whoa. Well, that's weird. That should have happened. We'll do that. So that way to make sure I'm on the camera. There we go. There we are. Cool. All right. We're back in it. So you guys will see what I see in just a second. I just wanted to make sure everything's there. So let's go ahead and take a look at... Oh, gosh, no. We're in a tunnel. Okay. Hold on. I got a better idea. Sorry. This is what happens when you don't feel well for several days and you haven't really streamed and you think you prepared everything and you forgot to even put your microphone up. It's been a rough, 5 days. Is a PowerPoint in Schoology? It is not in Schoology yet, my friend. I apologize. It will be when I'm done doing this this afternoon. You know what? We'll just do this. It's okay. You guys can see this. Let's see. All right. Struggling today, gang. I apologize. All right. I'm on the wrong screen. There we go. So, we need to know what the difference between an upstander and a bystander is. And part of this has to do with when the Nazi Party takes power in 1933. The series of manipulating and funneling through their legislature at the time, and eventually they get elected into the Reichstag at the time, and eventually gain power through numbers. And that's kind of how, in our democracy, we have a two-party system, and it's fairly simple, right? And we also have a bicameral legislature, and in this case, that means we have two chambers of Congress, which means you have the House of Representatives and you have the Senate. Now, in the Reichstag and other European models of democracy, you don't necessarily have a two-party system. You have multi-party systems. I mean, in Israel, they have like 40 major political parties. And because they have so many political parties, it means you have to have a bunch of those parties kind of come together because they have similar views, but not quite the same. And overall, they would try to collect as many people as possible, or as many of those groups as possible, and create coalitions, and that's how they would get things done. So over time, the Nazi Party would gain more and more people and into the Reichstag, or their version of Congress, and eventually, by 1933, had enough of a majority that they could elect a new Chancellor of Germany, and in this case, that would be Adolf Hitler. And those laws started coming from that point on, and Hitler wanted to unite Germany behind a common enemy. Creating a common enemy makes it a lot simpler for you to create some form of boogeyman, if you will, that you're fighting against. And so much so that this boogeyman is so scary and so powerful and so daunting that people are willing to do things that they may not have ever considered doing because the fear becomes real. Okay, fear gets us to do all sorts of things, right? That's why every time, like one time I caught a student cheating on a test and they were so afraid that their parents were going to freak out and take their phone, blah, 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 that the child would never cheat. But here we go. So that leads us to where the Holocaust begins. Now, between 1933 and 1938, the Nazis implemented a series of laws that weakened the power of the German Jewish community. Okay, so Jews lost civil service jobs, Jewish youth suffered humiliation in school, German Jews watched as their friends and relatives left the country. So many Jews at the time, back then, even saw the writing on the wall. This isn't going to go well, and it's time to leave. And that's why we had some very prominent German scientists who were Jews came to the United States, including, well, he was Austrian, but this would include also a very famous one by the name of Albert Einstein. Okay. Now, part of this is that they were going through a process that they called Aryanization. You may have heard people when they refer to Adolf Hitler as referring to the master race, and when they say master race, they're talking about the Aryan race. In this case, they're talking about blonde hair, blue eyes, Germanic folk. Even though Adolf Hitler was in fact, brown hair, brown eyes, only about 5'5", 5'6", and was a half, it depends on who you talk to, half or quarter Jewish. So in this case, oops. All right. Now, throughout 1938, Hitler and his top officials accelerated their campaign against the Jewish people by going through the first step that they called Aryanization. And what their goal is to make Germany reflect the view that he believes Germany should be. Right? In this case, the Nazis required all Jewish-owned companies be sold to Aryans. So if you weren't one of what they would consider eventually the master race, then you would have to sell your business to someone who is of that race. And not only that, but they would make you sell it for a fraction of what the business could be worth. In August of 1939, a new law required that all Jews must have a Jewish first name. This, of course, would be as a means to identify and find people. So the idea of a Jewish person carrying on a name that maybe might be Christian in nature would make it, he felt that would go against the particular law he put in place. Thus, why would you think Adolf Hitler would make this mandate? Well, it makes it easier to identify the Jewish population. Okay? Now, At this point, emigration begins. Now, you've probably heard of the word immigration. Immigration is people coming into a country. Emigration is people leaving a country. Thousands of Jews started trying to emigrate to find stumbling blocks wherever they turned. So the goal would, you see all of these laws coming into place. You have to give up your businesses. You have to change your name. You have to go through all of these hurdles. You realize that your home is no longer, you're no longer welcome in your home. So the goal is to flee, to get out of here, to leave. And so what happens? Well, there's stumbling blocks upon this. Their passports were marked with the letter J to identify them as a Jew, and the difficulty in leaving Greater Germany couldn't be blamed solely on the Nazis, as they were eager to see them go, but it's other countries around them. The fear of accepting in new Jews into their country, they felt that this rising juggernaut power in Germany, it would cause trouble in the future. So what we started seeing is that other countries would start turning Jews away at the time. So as we said, we need to make sure we understand the difference between emigration and immigration, right? Emigration is promoted by a variety of factors as people leave their country in order to flee a war, find education, job opportunities, or join their family in another land. So emigration means you're just leaving a country to go live in another country. Immigration is much more tightly controlled by host countries who may be concerned about the effects of a large population influx or wish to achieve a kind of mixing of incoming residents. So as we see in the United States, immigration is always a hot button issue. Typically, we more concern ourselves with illegal immigration. That's people coming into the United States without following a particular set of protocols that the government puts in place. Sorry, I talked really fast. I heard it that time. Illegal immigration is when people come into the country without following the legal process of becoming a citizen. Whereas regular immigration is someone who moves here for work, school, a new life, whatever it might be, but they go through the proper channels of getting their paperwork and all their stuff processed and go. So in this case, I want you guys to think about it. So can a state arbitrarily, having unlimited power, withdraw nationality from a whole class of citizens? So when we think back to like the 14th Amendment made African Americans citizens of a country. That's going the reverse. So that's saying all these people who are already here, who are not citizens, boom, you are now citizens. In this case, they're flipping it on its head. We're taking a large chunk of our citizens and saying, boom, you are no longer citizens. We are taking away your rights. Okay? And now, thereby making them stateless persons who have no country and is compelled to receive or to be in any territory at this fact. So the Jewish population in Germany went through a very staggering change in 5 years. They went from being productive members of society, doctors, lawyers, bankers, college professors, tailors, whatever they might be, to suddenly having to give up their businesses and their practices, drop out of their universities, kicked out of school, no longer to own a job, having to have special designations in their passport, being restricted to what you can name your child. All these restrictions in a very short amount of time. And this is just the beginning. So this is the very beginning of what we would classify as the era prior to the Holocaust. The Holocaust typically is 1940 to 1944. Or well, 45, but it was really pretty much over by 44. So this is only the beginning. So we haven't even gotten to what we would consider. But in 1938, we start seeing crisis level situation happening, right? So on October 26, 1938, the Nazis expelled Polish Jews living in Germany, totaling about 70,000 men, women, and children. So they identified Jews who lived in the country who were not native German. So of course, they were not born from Germany. They are of they're of Polish heritage. Now, Poland would, of course, refuse to accept them. Other countries had very little interest in accepting thousands of, in this case, they called them penniless Jewish refugees. They're taking in people who have had all of their things taken from them. They have no financial backing. They have no money, no businesses, no nothing. And then they're going to be dropped on your doorstep. Most countries at the time had their own issues, their own problems. They didn't want to take these people in. And let's be fair, anti-Semitism was rampant throughout Europe. Okay, so there's been a stigma against Jews in Europe for a long time. And so this would only exacerbate or make worse the situation that's going on with these with the Jewish people in Germany being picked up and forced out of their own homes. So you're probably thinking to yourself, what are they going to do? They're kind of stuck, right? You have a country that has formally removed their pretty much any position and rank within government or within society for that matter. They've taken away their businesses. They've taken away their access to education. They've taken away their ability to freely travel. They've taken away their ability to be citizens. And now when they're trying to expel them out of their society, they're kind of stuck. Because other countries don't want to take them in either. And things get a lot worse. Now, Herschel Grinspan. He was a 17-year-old Polish Jew living in France. Now, he became angry with his inability to help his family, so he marched to the German embassy in Paris, November 7th, 1938, and shot a Nazi official who would die 2 days later. You can go watch a video about it, but you could probably imagine what's going to happen. So, as we said in the beginning of the video, is this. Adolf Hitler wanted to unify Germany behind a common threat. Why was there so much anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism has been running... that's a good question, Hudson. Anti-Semitism had been running rampant throughout Europe for centuries. Okay? Lots of stories have been taking place. So if you go back in time, you've probably heard of stories where they talk about the Passion of the Christ, right? So they talk about how the Jewish people turned their back on Jesus, which is not necessarily true. It's a lot of... cherry picking the Bible, if you will. So you take certain parts of the Bible and exemplify that and talk about that, but you don't talk about the other aspects of it. But there's this notion that the Jewish people betrayed Jesus, and this notion that the Jews were responsible for a lot of the early problems that Christians had in the beginning, and they were seen as a group outside of the norm in much of Europe. So if you go back to feudal Europe, so you're talking about Middle Age Europe, so anywhere between the 10th century all the way up to 1700s. Most governments were based off of Christian values. We even talked about it long time ago when we talked about Henry VIII and how he wanted to go and, get divorced from his wife and get married to someone new. But the Pope pretty much had control, right? You had the kings who were here, all the kings of Europe were right here, and then there's the Pope, right? The Pope makes all final decision on many things. So Christianity was the basis of not just most society, but most government, okay? So anybody that would go... that didn't follow Christian ideals and basics were seen as odd and outsiders. And, of course, in this case, Jews at the time were an easy target. Many of them still lived in Europe, and they were seen as outsiders and people who did not follow the religion of most of society and most of government. So we saw a large amount of anti-Semitism throughout Europe at the time, even in, to a certain extent in the United States. However... there's a difference between, being ostracized and insulted and maybe had some rights restricted versus what was happening in Germany. Because Germany's took it to a much higher level and would take it even further after this particular event. Okay? Because what this leads to is Kristallnacht. Okay? I didn't just have word salad there. That's German. Kristallnacht, which is the night of glass. Okay? We're going to talk about that. Okay? The night of broken glass. My bad. So the Night of Broken Glass occurs on Kristallnacht. After the shooting, the Nazis made it their job to avenge his death. So when you go and kill a Nazi officer, and a particular officer in this case, in a government that has been ostracizing and trying to put Jews in a disadvantageous and terrible position, you just open up a very big can of worms. And on the night of November 9th, 1938, it became to be known as Kristallnacht, okay, the Night of Broken Glass. This night, the Nazis looted and destroyed Jewish homes, businesses, in every part of the country. They set fire to 191 synagogues, killed over 90 people, and sent 30,000 to concentration camps. Okay? Now, keep in mind, they killed one person. One man killed one person. And we're not justifying whether or not Herschel was right for killing that man. Of course he was wrong. He shouldn't have done it. However, this was the response Adolf Hitler was looking for. This was that moment. He tried to create a common enemy for the German people to rally around, and he got it. And he took advantage of it. Okay? Because there were significant repercussions. 2 days later, the government fined the Jewish community 1 billion marks. Okay, is that about that would be today approximately, well, 1 mark would be about $2.30 for property damage, okay? So you're talking about, so you think about it, the Nazis and German people destroyed German synagogues, buildings, businesses, killed 90 Jews in the process, and the Jewish people were punished. They were charged 1 billion or 1 billion marks, which at modern day currency would be about like 2.3 or 2.4 billion dollars in the event. Okay, this event marked the point of crisis for the Jews living in German occupied Europe. So in this point, you've come to the realization you're in trouble. If you are a Jew living in Germany, and the writing's on the wall that Germany's looking to expand, any neighboring country of Germany, so you're talking like Austria, Switzerland, anything like that, it's time to go. Okay? Okay, now the Kristallnacht marked the beginning of government-sanctioned physical violence. So this means, it's not just, you'll hear it on the news, you'll hear the news about hate crimes in the United States, where if there was a terrorist attack committed by an Islamic fascist group, and then someone will take it out on an innocent Muslim person living in the United States who had nothing to do with it. They just happen to have the same religion as the other person, and they get punished, right? I've saw videos recently where a man was assaulted on a was assaulted on a subway car in New York City because he was Asian, and people assumed, because the coronavirus had originated out in Wuhan in China, that this man is responsible, even though he's probably not even Chinese in heritage, but because he looked Asian, they attacked him. That's not government sanctioned violence. That's, some weirdo who doesn't know any better and is a psycho going and attacking somebody. But this is the government saying, yes, it's okay to attack them, and it's perfectly fine. Not only that, you attacked all these people, and we're gonna charge them to pay for it, right? This creates significant things. Now all Germans acted as perpetrators or bystanders during Kristallnacht, right? Many resigned their membership to the Nazi Party. Now, many of them saw, okay, look, all right, it's okay. We don't agree with how the Jewish people take advantage of certain economic factors in our country. We don't like how they are different from us in our ways. We think a united Aryan Germany would be the best case scenario. But violence against them was not what I signed up for. So you saw many actually leaving, and it made it clear that they were not objecting to anti-Semitism. So that's what I'm trying to refer to. So they'll still be against the Jewish people, but they don't want mob violence. They don't want people in the street burning buildings down. That's not what they agreed to. Okay. Others still quietly brought Jewish families food and other necessities to replace items that had been destroyed. So those are people who saw what's happening to the Jewish people. They may not want to be, they don't want to be seen going out there and helping their Jewish neighbors and friends. But they quietly feel bad about what's happening. So they secretly would go and give them food and supplies and things to help them get through this. That leads us to a pretty, I would hope, a slam dunk simple answer. Which one would you be? Would you be the bystander who sits there and watches what happens and just lets it happen? Or would you be the upstander who comes out and defends against something you feel is absolutely morally repugnant and wrong? And I know we've probably in my class had this conversation a billion times. If you see a kid getting bullied in the middle of the hallway, whether you like the kid or not, by that I mean the bullied kid. Whether you know him, he's your best friend, he's your sibling's friend, or you've never met this dude a day in your life, are you the kid who kind of looks there, snickers at it, and walks away? Or are you the kid who stands up and says, hey man, leave this kid alone? Even when, now in that moment, we all know that bullying is wrong. We all know we shouldn't participate in it. We all know we shouldn't be allowing bullying to happen. But in this case, this would be school-sponsored bullying. So the principal and teachers have been assigned to bully this child. It makes it difficult. Now, where we get to next is when things take a very drastic turn. And there's a word that people tend to use interchangeably, which shouldn't, because, let's be fair, they're not the same thing. Define Holocaust and define genocide. They're not the same words. Now, in this case, you guys would be asked to write this down and stuff. If we were in class, I would have had you write this down, but we're not there, so I'm assuming you guys are just mentally answering this yourselves. Because what we really need to remember is this, is that the Holocaust was a specific event. Okay, a period of 4 years between 1941 and 1944 when the Nazis organized and carried out the murder of 6 million Jews as well as millions of other innocent victims such as Jehovah's Witnesses. That's a very particular sect of Christians who, my thought is, in one of the, I'm trying to give you an example. Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe in celebrating anything aside from things that have to do with Christianity and Christ. They don't celebrate birthdays. They have a very hard time adhering to authorities outside of the church. So they're a very specific type. In fact, little known thing, Michael Jackson and his family were actually Jehovah's Witnesses. Boom, the more you know. Gypsies that's the phrase they were called. Nowadays they're called Roma, traveling Roma. They were a more or less a political sect. They didn't stay in one place very long. They traveled. They would move from place to place. In fact, I know modern day, if you're thinking of an example of someone, Tyson Fury, the boxer, he calls himself the Gypsy King because he's a part of Irish Gypsy, Irish Gypsy heritage. And of course, and in this case, of course, we would think of all the other marginalized groups, right? So African people, homosexuals, anybody that went outside of the Aryan Christian white male or Christian white blonde hair blue eyed mold. These people would be pretty much, their goal was to remove all of them from this particular society. So in this case, when we talk about the Holocaust, we're talking about a specific 4-year period in which Jews and other ethnic and religious groups were forcibly put into concentration camps and killed. A genocide is an act committed with the intent on destroying an ethnic, racial, national, or religious group. So the Holocaust was an example of a genocide. But Holocaust is not necessarily the same thing as genocide. Your thumb is a finger, but your finger's not a thumb. Okay? Your Holocaust is an example of a genocide. Your thumb is an example of a finger. But not all fingers are thumbs. Not all genocides are holocausts. There you go. It's a weird way to remember, but that's how I learned it. Finger and thumb thing. Boop. Okay. Now, the United Nations recognized genocide as a crime under international law in 1948 after the Second World War. The United Nations didn't exist until after World War II, so that gives you a heads up in terms of date. Article 2 in the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide states that genocide means any of the following acts committed: intent to destroy in whole or part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group, such as killing members of a group, causing serious bodily, mental, and harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting to one conditions of the life, calculating to bring about its physical destruction or in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So any way of trying to remove a segment of a population based on religious, ethnic, or racial means is a genocide. We've seen many versions of genocides. The Armenian genocide in the 1900s. We saw in Rwanda in the 1990s, the Hutus versus the Tutsis. There's many examples. Kosovo in the late 1990s was another example of genocide. So we see examples throughout history, but the Holocaust stands out alone. It was the largest of known Holocausts to have occurred in recent modern history. Okay. Now, there's 6 stages leading up to the Holocaust. So the big idea approach first. These big ideas are related to how we view others who are different than ourselves. So this will allow you to explore and understand a deeper dive into the root and causes of the Holocaust in a way that enables you to connect with your own experiences without making facile comparison. So in this case, making comparisons that it's always best never to use the Holocaust as a comparison to another item. Much like you always hear politicians slip up and they always try to say something like, oh, this is like slavery. No, don't compare it to slavery. This is like the Holocaust. Do not compare it to the Holocaust. So this is going to give us the background knowledge that we can actually compare it to something without sounding very silly and insensitive. Okay. Jews are defined as other through legalized discrimination. How does one define being Jewish? Through culture, race, or religion? The challenge confronting the Nazis in 1933 was to define a religious group already assimilated into German society. So Jews had been living in Germany for a long time, decades to over centuries. Now, the interior minister of the Nazi government was responsible for solving this problem. This group divided the German population into two categories. Aryans were people with no Jewish ancestors, and non-Aryans were all persons Jewish or Christian who had at least one Jewish parent or grandparent. Okay? So, through racism, the Nazis categorized people into fixed categories. The Nuremberg laws defined who was a Jew and who was not a Jew. If you want to look at an example, the website will be linked below. You can go back and look. Now, the propaganda they portrayed the difference between Germans and Jews and the inferiority of Germans. Okay? Actually, should have said superiority, but that's okay. Propaganda. We all know what propaganda is. You guys took civics. I'm very proud of you. You should know this. Now, words are very powerful. We know propaganda is a series of biased, targeted statements in order to try to persuade and change the minds of people listening. Language carries tremendous power, and it's important to understand how language can be used with devastating results by individuals, governments, and involved in genocide. If you don't believe me that words are very powerful, okay? Sorry. Let's switch to the main camera. If you don't believe me that words are very powerful, there was a large number of people who were convinced to eat Tide Pods because you put the word challenge behind it. You hear that silence? That silence is deafening. That silence is the sound of people saying, hey, it's a great idea to eat Tide Pods. But you put the word challenge behind it, people are willing to do it. People were lighting themselves on fire because they're putting Axe body spray on themselves and lighting a match. Because you put the word challenge behind it. Words are very powerful. What you say, what you do with any type of particular spotlight can have devastating impacts. Now, in that case, perpetrators of genocide have developed euphemisms for mass murder, such as liquidation, relocation, or the final solution, which is what the Nazi Germany used, or do your work, public safety committee, and use your tools. In particular, in Rwanda was used using examples of propaganda. So in this case, they would, if you go on national television and say that you're going to go and kill large numbers of a particular religious societal group, you're going to come off as ogreish and warmongering and terrible, and people aren't going to really follow you. But if you categorize the words that you use and slightly change the language and how you're going to say it, you'd be able to convince people that what you're doing is right. And because people are willing to accept things at a very surface level without much digging whatsoever, if I just give you what sounds like a good idea, you're probably just going to follow through with it. It's very easy. Oh, I'm on the wrong hand. Whoop, whoop. There we go. Now, the next step is isolation, or expropriation, if you want a fancier word. Once individuals are labeled as Jews in this case, they are separated from mainstream society. So we saw that when we talked about Germany earlier, right? So Nazis systematically took away their civil rights, education, occupations, private property, and synagogues or religious buildings for Jews in an effort to force Jews to emigrate or leave Germany. That way, Germany would be free of Jews. So at first, they tried to get them just to leave themselves. Now, Jews were not allowed to attend German schools or universities. It was illegal to socialize with Jews. So at one point, you weren't even allowed to go and talk to them or go to the same restaurant with them. Through the economy, Jews were excluded from civil services, and Jewish businesses were taken over by Germans. So they couldn't get loans and take out and work with a real financial institution like any type of bank or stock market of any kind. So they were kind of economically segregated, socially segregated, educationally segregated, politically segregated. They were left alone in isolation. And their only choice was to leave. And many did. Many of those who could afford to go did. And those who couldn't became stuck because there was nowhere else to go. Right? So these, now, a motorcyclist in a village on the outskirts take in a sign proclaiming Jews are not welcomed here. And this was in 1935. Juden. Okay, I can't read it well enough to read it. So I can't see it well enough to read it. There you go. These stormtroopers were soldiers of the Nazi Party, and that's where the name Stormtrooper comes from Star Wars, if you didn't know. These stormtroopers are outside Israel's department store in Berlin. The sign reads, Germans, defend yourselves, don't buy from Jews. So the store was ransacked during the Kristallnacht in 1938, then handed over to a non-Jewish family. The next step was stage 3. Emigration Jews are encouraged to leave Germany with the beginning of the Second World War in 1939 when Germany invades Poland. The Nazis applied their racial laws to the country. They invade and occupy. So now once, for example, Poland goes and Austria goes and Switzerland goes and Paris was the fall of Paris led to France coming down. All of these territories now become part of Germany. And now those laws apply. Okay? So now those laws apply. I'm missing a conference call for my school. I just realized that, but we'll just funnel through. Okay? I really should be on that conference call, but it's okay. I'll text Miss Deckley. All right, now, Kristallnacht encouraged many Jews to leave the area. Though discriminatory laws like many educators left Germany due to lack of jobs, new immigration laws allowed Jews to obtain visas and leave, but they had to leave behind all of their valuables. So not only did you leave, but you had to leave your stuff behind. You can't take it with you. You can't take your money, can't take any valuable items you might have. So the government was ultimately taking all these things from these people before they left as well. Okay, you can see in these passports they had the large J to symbolize the fact that they were Jewish. Now, imagine a Jewish household being ransacked, items thrown on the floor, pictures smashed to pieces, and all valuables were being stashed in bags by Nazi officials. Now, in this case, how do you feel? What do you do? And are you scared or proud in this case? If you were, of course, a member of the Nazi Party, in some cases they were proud. They were doing what their country told them to do. They were doing what they thought was best. If you're one of these, if you're a Jewish adolescent living in this home, of course, your whole life is being destroyed around you, and you don't really understand why. And back then, education was prominent in much of Germany, but it wasn't as prominent as you would probably see modern day. But so many of these people really didn't understand what was happening. And they couldn't understand why, especially if you're a small child. If you're a small child at the time, you don't even know why these people despise you so much, to the point where they're taking all of your livelihood. Now, here's a particularly important word. Now, the term ghetto is a word that kids use all the time modern day to talk about something that is poor, something that is decrepit and run down and not great. Right? You hear kids talk about, oh, he's so ghetto. This is a term that comes from a place of discrimination and prejudice, and it actually has a very unfortunate background. So it's kind of sad that people still say it. The word has changed over time. Now, the ghettoization Jews are forcibly removed to segregated sections of Eastern Europe cities called ghettos. Now, the term ghetto actually originates from the name of the Jewish quarter in Venice, established in 1516, and the Venetian authorities compelled the city's Jews to live. So they wanted to have all of their Jews. This is, like I said, much of anti-Semitism existed in Europe for centuries. In 1516, the Venetian authorities in Venice, Italy, actually had their Jews live in a part of the city that was walled off from the rest of the city. Okay? They were not allowed to leave without permission. In this case, in the Nazi Party, these Jews would be forced into these ghettos and would be stuck here until they could eventually the solution could be solved. Okay, conditions were crowded and filthy. There were few jobs in the ghettos, and since everyone had to give up their property and values, most of the residents were very poor. Food was scarce, and forced unpaid labor was common. Now, there were three types of ghettos: closed ghettos, open ghettos, and destruction ghettos. The largest ghetto in Poland was the Warsaw Ghetto, which saw more than 400,000 Jews crammed into an area of 1.3 square miles. That is absolutely tiny. Okay? So if you saw the city of Warsaw, the populations it was about 1.3 million. You see 920,000 Aryans living in Warsaw, and the ghetto of Warsaw had about almost 500,000 Jews living in there. Now that 920,000 lived in about 53.3 square miles. That 500,000 lived in about 1.3 square miles. Okay? Now if you look at the number of rooms that were available, there were about 284,000 total rooms, 223,617 for Aryans, 61,295. That meant there was average about 4 people per room in the Aryan Warsaw versus 7.2. So you almost have twice as many people per room in the ghetto of Warsaw. That meant these people lived in horrible conditions and absolute squalor. Here you can see a picture of the walls being put up to separate the ghetto of Warsaw from the rest of the city. Now, the deportation of Jews are transported from ghettos to concentration camps to death camps. Now, the Nazis built their first concentration camp in 1933 as a place to detain those opposing the Nazi platform. So anybody who went against the Nazi party got sent to one of these places. Now, eventually that would be more focused into the extermination of these people. So as World War II began, more were created to detain enemies of the state. This would include Jews, gypsies, and homosexuals. Many concentration camps served as labor camps where inmates worked until they either starved to death or died from disease. In stage 5, because these camps were located away from major cities, victims had to be transported to them via train. Some rides lasted for several days, leading to many deaths en route to these camps. These men, women, and children would be hoarded onto these trains and packed so tightly that many of them would actually die from suffocation and asphyxiation from not being able to breathe. It's horrible. Okay, for those of us who have ever been to the Holocaust Museum, they have one down here in Sarasota, and I think it's in Tampa? Let's say, one of you guys will correct me. I've never been to the one in Florida. I've been to the national one in Washington, D.C., and it's absolutely horrifying. Every moment of that entire trip was terrible, from the beginning to the end. Okay, so here's some examples of what we're talking about in these concentration camps. In the finals, one of the last stages, stage 6, was mass murder. Okay? It is estimated that the Nazis killed anywhere between about 11 million innocent people during World War II. People died mostly through shooting, suffocation in gas chambers, and imprisonment in labor and death camps. 2/3 of the entire Jewish population was killed by the Nazis. Now, the big problem is there was a failure to help. Now, connection questions. The U.S. considers themselves as policemen of the world. Is this act a practice of that? Could something like this happen again? Explain why or not. And does this event have historical context? And explain. So these are kind of questions to kind of think about because these might be questions that we might talk about. Okay. Now, just to go over this before we wrap this up for today. We want to know the 6 stages, and we're going to talk more about it tomorrow in greater context World War II. We're going to look at the rise of Adolf Hitler tomorrow to understand how we got here, but we want to primarily focus ourselves on the Holocaust itself. In order for the Holocaust to happen, the enemy had to be targeted and identified, defined. Later, they'd be isolated, forcibly given the chance to escape and leave, then forcibly removed, separated, isolated, and through a process of ghettoization, relocated and removed from main parts of society, and eventually they would be murdered. This is the history of the Holocaust in the 1940s, Europe and Germany in particular. So, leaving here today, you guys will have a discussion board and a link to this video I'm going to put in there. I want you guys to think about what did you take away from what did you learn today that you did not know about the Holocaust in particular. Many of you probably know a lot of this, which is great, and I'm glad you guys are academic scholars who pursue knowledge and understanding. but many of you probably learned something a little bit different today, something that you probably never knew. So please go ahead and watch this video again later. You can skip ahead to a part that you need to watch in particular, answer the discussion question. Hopefully you guys have a wonderful day. Today was very boring. I'm not making jokes, not about this, not even close. Hopefully you guys have a wonderful day. Be good, be safe, and well, bye-bye. Adios, guys.